Alrighty, so week 6 is our next dev work. And I know that these dev projects require, sorry, I've changed my camera. So I'm like, which way do I look? Require definitely some time investment. They can create different kinds of emotion depending on your life, your understanding of this material. Because here's the reality. I'm asking you to take the things that we've learned, the learn together code, and create something, right? That in this case, I'll go over the requirements that you then bring into a code review, right? And then how well you discuss and communicate that what that code's doing feeds into your grade. And as I've said, it's 50% of your grade. So if you bring me working code, you're in a good place, right? That's kind of 50% of the work. The other 50% is how well can you talk about and walk through that code using dev tools. So this is our second one, our dev 1, dev 0, dev 1, dev 2. So dev 2 is our last one at the end of the semester, which in this case, these 9 weeks are going by really quickly. So let's just jump in to give you an overview, right, of this. So like before, that you will have, and I'm recording this, you can see here, I'm recording this in week 5. I just finished the Learn Together video here. Sorry, week 6. Yeah, no, I just finished the Learn Together for week 6. And so because we don't have a Learn Together for the night, this is just like before. The schedule for signing up for code reviews will be the same, but I will at least go over it. Now, having said that, at this point, we are doing a code up section. This code up section for part 9 is really just taking the JavaScript that we've learned and adding some more functionality and refactoring our function into arrow functions, learning how to use truthy values, learning how to use ternary, and of course, I think probably one of the most important things in addition to the arrow functions is learning how to handle errors. Okay. And so anyway, but it adds everything you need at this point. You can write this dev 1 because it's a CRUD operation, right? Now I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. So let's look at our the item itself, right, is here, and I'll go over these items in more detail. But as before, the signups will be on the attendance post. Here's the link. And as before, they will follow my office hours. Okay. Now, there was a little bit of confusion last time, partly because I had the dates wrong, but people understood what I meant. So, this is the time before the due date, right? Again, if we look at the calendar, right, this is all these Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, you can come see me, even though my office hours might be scheduled, just by reaching out, right? So if you look, because one of the things during this week is because my office hours are scheduled, if you can't get into that, then reach out and let me know. Now, let me say this, the more heads up you can give me, the more flexible I can be. Like if you sent me a message that you wanted to meet me at 5 o'clock on Tuesday evening, but you sent it to me or late afternoon. Let's say you sent it to me at 4. That's probably not going to work because honestly, as it gets closer, my schedule gets firmer. There's things that happen that I've already committed to. So if you let me know on Monday that you want to meet with me on Tuesday at 5, chances are better I'm going to be able to work that out. Okay. The other thing about this is that remember here, you're signing up for a review or assistance. And in either case, definitely submit your code a little ahead, and more so if you're doing a review, because I like to spend some time looking at your code, making notes that I can talk about in our code reviews. And if you don't, then I'm kind of doing it on the fly a little bit. So, submit that code if you're doing reviews or assistance early to give me a chance to do that. So know that once I start in sessions, I obviously can't look at it at that point. All right, so just like before, this is right up until the due date, right? So Thursday night at midnight, this code for your dev one has to be submitted, and then you will have the following week to complete, in that case, your review session. Okay, so now if you're signing up for assistance here, it's probably because you didn't submit your work. Do know you can submit this late, but it is discounted 25%. Okay. Okay, coming back here. Now let's talk about the actual requirements. And they probably are not going to be a surprise because it's what we've basically been doing in the Learn Together for the last couple weeks. So you need to take, most of you will take your Dev Zero code base. Okay. And by the way, while I'm here, let me just say, and I want to move over to the browser or into my editor, is that in this case, they need to go in your private repo, and they should be, in this case, in a directory called folder dev and then dev one for this. And then you can take your dev zero and then copy it into here and then start working on it from there. Okay. And it does need to be up in your private repo. And what that means is when you submit it, you do not have to give me a Git hack link. If you notice when you were looking at my editor a minute ago, I pull the code into my local system, and that's how I review it. I don't review it from the web. I do run it locally, and I run live server, so you do not have to submit a Git hack link. So in this case, we're basically, and I actually ended up spelling it out here, is you're creating those CRUD operations for your topic. So again, most of you will probably take your devs zero and implement these requirements. If you do change your dev zero for your dev, you change completely, do know it has to meet the requirements of the dev zero. So go back and review them if you change your topic, because that's one of the things I will look for, is if you've done something different, you do need to meet those requirements. All right, so get at least two things from the user, two types of input from the user in the browser. Okay. And I say down here, so I'll just kind of connect it. You do have to validate that input. And I do want you to do something more than the required attribute. I want you to write some custom validation here, right? We've already done that, so that's not a big surprise, but I want you to have at least accounted for not just does the field exist, does the input, was it provided by doing a required, but also write some additional form validation. Store the information with associated dates. You definitely can use moments.js. I'll show you in a minute how I used it for my dev1 output, and then use that UUID. I will talk about in a minute, there's different ways you could show that specific item, right? Because you're gathering the user input, you're presenting it back to the screen. Now, let me just say a word here. When we are going through the course, Udemy course, Andrew, when he was doing the to-dos and he was doing the notes app, he was doing nothing more in a functionality standpoint than gathering the user input and storing it in local storage and presenting it back. He wasn't doing anything with the data. Your app needs to do something more, which is why during the Learn Together work, I was having you do either a daily decision or something else to where you captured that user data and you did something with it. You processed and did some kind of processing to store some kind of processed data. So it's not just the data itself, it needs to be processed in some way. Okay. Give the user the ability to edit their input in some way. I'll show you how. Actually, I showed you in my output in week 6, my item that you're going to look at is how I handled this, because the idea here is that you want to create for your particular concept how you think the edit, what kind of edit would you want the user to do? Okay. Process data, present it back to the user. This is, again, there's nothing new here. We've been doing all this, but I explicitly wanted to give an item that said this, right? So you need to do all the CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. I talk about these in more detail in the week 6 Learn Together, the one you need to do this week. Okay, so the next thing you're basically, oh no, you're going to do the code along and then do the Learn Together. Now this is the new one. Is I want you to stretch yourself, right, by writing, at least 2 forms of JavaScript code. It could be full functionality, it could just be a line of code that's not been covered in this class. And I'll show you what I ended up doing, or at least cover conceptually what I did. And use arrow functions, which is in my style guide, unless you can make a case for not. It should be not using them. And I should have made this on a separate line, but I didn't. But handle application errors and input errors. And this is where we learn how to write the try blocks and handle that. Makes more sense. At least I want to see. And in this case, the handling the errors can be what we saw implemented with Andrew's code, as far as storing and saving, storing into and bringing back from local storage. You want to have meaningful output. This is kind of what I was saying here with where you're processing the data, right? I want to see something meaningful. Follow my style guide and create some basic CSS. Does not have to be advanced, but basic. And the student, just like last time, will walk me through their code using DevTools. Now, because we have a bigger code base here, we're going to focus on specific parts of your code, probably the parts of your code that you ventured outside. And I will give you, again, set a breakpoint, like I'll probably start with. Again, I'll give you a little hint here, is the idea of set a breakpoint that's inside of the event listener before the user submits the data. And that's probably a good place, so as long as you know how to do that, right? So if I was to do that, let me just move for a minute. Here's my dev1 output. I ended up writing my app to be tracking charging data for my electric vehicle, my EV. So where I would do this is I'd hit inspect, go to my, okay, by the way, you can see how, and this is good to know, is that you want to make sure your site at least flexes a little bit. And I can see that mine does, to where my form stays on the top, my list of items, and then some of my standard data is listed. So I think I use Flexbox here. But let me go to my source, right? And then I'd go to my JS, I'd go to my app, and then if I wanted to stop, right, I had 2 forms. I ended up, you don't have to do 2. I did a quick, because it really was more realistic for the data that I wanted to use, a quick entry and a detailed entry. So what I might do here is set a breakpoint here. And then if I reload the page, right, the page still reloads and it's on the quick form. So if I wanted to put in a number here, as soon as I hit submit, and in this case, last time we needed to reload the page, but because we're setting breakpoints within the event listeners, it's fine to do that here. And then you can step, right? Knowing how to step out of things. If I say step out of that, means, once this, matter of fact, let me just go ahead and step, because once I'm in the function, I'll show you where you can step. Now, in this case, this is moments.js. So I do not want to run this step by step. And the reason why is it's going to open moments.js. And I'm like, no, I don't need to do that. You don't have to show me. You can jump over. And then what we can look at is what got stored in there. Okay. And I can see the value that got stored. So I just want you to know that. Right. And so that still is a requirement this time, knowing how to step over, step into code. Is that step over? Yeah, step over, step into. You can do these other ones as well. This one just go ahead and executes the rest of the script as well. So while we're here, let me just go ahead and show you. There it is. What my app did. So the create was, you just entered either through quick entry or detailed entry the charging information. it presented it back. It actually ended up color coding, because there's two kinds of charging: home charging or supercharging. And this is where I ended up putting quite a bit of work over here, was when you entered sessions, it goes back and gives you monthly totals. And this is where I ended up using some other higher order array functions. In this case, reduce. Reduce is a way to determine totals. And I ended up using moments.js and that to actually create my output here. Okay. So that's what I ended up doing. Now, do you have to do something like this? No, right? This is something I did to extend my knowledge of what we've learned in this section. Now, having said that, let me come back to this, because I put a note here because I know this can get a little confusing, right? Oh, by the way, there's your sign up sheet. But write your own code. What does this mean? And in this case, right, what we're learning in the Udemy course, it's not that I wouldn't expect to see maybe the function that do basically, especially on the local storage, but they do need to be changed to reflect your particular topic, for one thing. So that's minimum change, right? So I shouldn't see his code in the sense that you at least need to change the variable names, but you do need to add code to this. That is some code that you write on your own, again, that meets my requirements. So when I say write your own code, again, what we've learned in the Udemy course is a great best practice. And I think following that structure of having first a functions JS file, having all your functions in there is good. Okay. But then customizing it for your own topic and then writing code on top of it. One of the things, if you use code, and this is a good practice too, because remember what you're doing here. Let me actually come back and say this to you, since I'm hunkered down in here. The idea here is that in a code review, you're submitting your code. Okay. So if your functions in this case are doing basically everything that Andrew's functions did, but with just changing variable names, putting inspired by Andrew Mead would be fine, but at least noting that. And where you're writing functions that are just doing things that are unique to your application, right? You don't have to do that. But if you find other code that inspired what you did, you need to give reference to that. Okay. Because that's where I know it's very common, right? It's very common to go out and find, it's like, I'm trying to accomplish this. Can I find an example? Right. And if you use that by and then again, just changing the variable names, you're still responsible for describing what that code's doing. And it should have a reference on it, because the way I'm going to grade you is how well did you, because I can pretty much look at code and tell if students wrote it or not. It's honestly at this point, maybe because I've been doing it a little while, but I've gotten to know through your first dev kind of your level of coding. So when I see something that I kind of go, wait a minute, doesn't have a reference, and I'm guessing that came, and there are telltale signs often to this stuff. But again, the idea is that it's okay to get inspired by code out there. Just give it the proper reference, right? Give it the proper reference and be able to describe what it's doing. Because trust me, if you were in a professional environment, that's what they would, and you get nailed for that if you submitted code as your own, but was really somebody else's, and you didn't reference and you couldn't describe what was going on. So that's what I'm looking for. Okay. And that's what I mean here, right? Write your own code and give reference where that makes sense. Okay, so going back here, because I kind of stopped here. We talked about most of this already, right? And I definitely say if you're going to change your topic, come talk to me. Maybe I think in your dev zero, most of you I talked to, I think only a few of you were going to do something different. I did update my style guide to at least put that use arrow functions, unless there's a reason. right? Unless there's a reason, you should be able to verbalize what that reason is if you have not used them. And this is a good practice too. One I think I only ran into a couple times is definitely use the VS Code for formatting your code, because sometimes when you're writing it, because one of the things you want is readable code, right? So down here, and I'm actually going to put this is again not the best example because I'm showing it from the pub and it will be in your private, but I do this so that you can look at mine if you want to, right? One of the things you want to be able to do is read through code. And one of the ways that code is made readable is by formatting it. And this is where I use Prettier as an extension. Just so once I write something, if code is all over, then I can just go through and I could do the whole page and I could just say format with Prettier, and then it will make that code align so that when somebody's reading it, right, it makes it much easier to read, right? Use camel case. File names need to be lowercase. I did in my example also put a CSS folder, a JS folder, and an image folder. I don't think I used, yeah, I did. I used one images. You don't have to, but you absolutely can. Okay. And that's the other thing is definitely, and in this case, test to make sure all your code branches work, right? That's, I mean, part of this, we're validating that the user is giving us good input, but we also want to make sure that our logic is working. Okay, so you want to make sure because in this case, we're actually handling the user input versus providing it like we had done on your dev zero. Okay, what else? I think that's it. I think I've given you everything I had wanted to go over for this. And I look forward to, honestly, as I've said before, I believe the dev work is the most important work you do for this class. I also know it is most likely the most challenging because you're really having to understand these concepts and then write code for your specific application, your specific topic. And I know, I mean, I know because I've done it and I know how hard it can be, but I also know I'm hitting my head. I learned so much by doing it. So anyway, hope that helps you. Week 6. Have a great one.